The new Argentinian film Recurrence is the third entry in the Crimes of the South collection, with Perdida and Intuition coming before it. Now, this new film continues to follow Pipa and involves a new mystery, but is it really worth watching? Manuela Pipa Pelari is not the same woman as she once was. The stern woman who survived her time in the federal police department by breaking the rules and keeping dark secrets has decided to change her life. In a small northern Argentinian town, Pipa found peace and the opportunity to start over and let her guard down. She promised herself to never return to violence again, until the tragic death of a teenage girl drags her back into the one place she thought she had escaped from. This film starts off beautifully and eerily. We get some incredible landscape shots with stunning aerials showing the terrain's isolation and desolation, and this beauty quickly transitions to the discovery of a dead young woman, with the police arriving on the scene to investigate. Now, this is a great way to begin the narrative. It's not wasting any time, but instead it's just thrusting us right into the case that is going to become the central focus for the story. Now, once the crime is established, the film then takes us back a bunch of hours to begin to see how some of the events that lead up to the death. We get some introductions to a few of the local police, as well as the well-to-do families who basically run the town due to their wealth and influence. We also see Pipa gardening and living a pretty isolated life with her son. Now, as much as I like how the story begins, the middle portion of this movie is pretty choppy. There are a lot of sequences that are happening, and they feel connected within the story, but the transitions and then the way that they're just stitched together, they're not always smooth or natural. And when these happen, there are portions that feel left out. It's like the writers knew the story that they wanted to tell, but they knew it so well that they just omitted parts without realizing it. Does the overall case make sense? Yeah, it does. I could follow along and track with it all, but in some of the instances, it just wasn't as great of a feeling while watching. Now, I like that this film is bringing in some things that feel like cultural conversations. And I don't think you need to be part of this particular culture to understand or even empathize with what's going on. There's the universal struggle of indigenous people who are fighting for their rights to land and then fighting against wealth and power. Now, the rich believe that privilege is reason enough to take the land and displace the original inhabitants. This isn't the main focus of the story, but it does weave its way throughout, and I think it provides some good commentary, even if it's an offshoot narrative. But these aren't out in left field either. There are some connections to the main storyline, which then help to tie everything together. The musical score in this is a bit of a head-scratcher. There are portions that feel like the music came from an 80s sci-fi TV series, which is an odd contrast to what's actually being shown on screen. Now, other times, the score is fairly dramatic, which then complements the tone of the narrative. The mix of those is what made it noticeable to me, and not really in a great way. It's not like the score is bad, but it just doesn't fit a lot of the time. I mentioned that the middle portion of this movie feels a little choppy, even though we are getting story progression. Now, as the story works towards the third act, everything re-engages and actually becomes very suspenseful. And up until this point, I never felt urgency, even though there is supposed urgency to figure out how the girl died. But as the film moves towards the climax, there's a bit of a ticking clock to all of the actions, and I really enjoyed this part of the story. You can just feel how it's getting close to reveals and perhaps even uncovering the mystery. There's also a wonderful use of extended suspense. We're shown a bit of evidence that begins to show motive, but we don't get to see the whole thing. Instead, we get reactions of people watching the evidence and seeing it. And it was aggravating and frustrating, but I loved the delayed gratification because there was still more to the story that needed to play out before we get more insight. And thankfully, we are rewarded with the motivations. Now, I say thankfully hesitantly because the content itself is gross. But the last big portion of the film also contains the most action we get in this crime drama. And within this, the stakes feel very high. There is a great deal of danger and peril that our characters face. Now, I wasn't connected with some of them as much as I probably should have been, but because of who the characters are, I still felt a sense of dread when it came to their safety. And even though my interest in the story did wane a bit through the middle, I was completely reinvigorated for the finale. I know it doesn't completely make up for an just okay midsection, but it is a great way to conclude the story. And I mentioned how the opening sequence had some spectacular cinematography, and it's not just limited to that part of the movie. Now, because of the mountainous and the remote setting, there are plenty of opportunities for the filmmakers to just exploit the natural beauty of the landscapes, and they take full advantage. Some of my favorite shots were of a group of boys traversing along a riverbed of a canyon. Now, we get to see how incredibly dwarfed they are by just these huge sheer cliffs behind them. Now, it was great to establish scale while also creating this sense of isolating danger, which was then needed to crank up the anxiety when the crap hits the fan, making the danger all the more plausible. So overall, Recurrence starts off with a very intriguing crime mystery, but gets lost a little in the middle thanks to some choppy transitioning and connections. Thankfully, the overall story is still understandable, so despite any presentation wonkiness, we can still track along. I enjoyed the themes that are explored that have to do with power and influence and the assumed privilege that they bring with them. The mystery is held pretty close to the vest, not giving too many clues as to why the act occurred. And I really enjoyed how the reveal is teased out, providing some effective frustration that continued to keep me invested. I particularly enjoyed the final act where tension and urgency cranked up, making the last part of the movie compelling and exciting. Now, I don't think this is necessarily a film that you need to drop everything to watch, but if you're in the mood for a decent mystery and you want to see some wonderful landscapes, you might want to give this one a watch. There's sex, nudity, a lot of profanity, and a ton of violence. I give Recurrence 3 out of 5 couches. So if you could live in some remote town, would you want to? Let me know why or why not in the comments below. Now, I'd say absolutely on a couple of conditions, though. I mean, it's got to be near the ocean and there's reliable internet service. And then I'd be good to go. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.